Chris Lee and Blayne Gilmer of Southeastern 14 here to preview the college football playoff semifinal in the Peach Bowl, the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl in Atlanta, Georgia. That'll be coming up New Year's Eve, 8 Eastern. Boy, Blayne, I can't wait for this one.
Blayne, we got too many B's on the thing here, but listen, we got
Blake can't wait for it either.
No doubt, it's gonna be great. And if you're new to this channel and you like it, all kinds of sports, you need to make sure to subscribe because Blake Lovell puts out a bunch of basketball content as well. So but in terms of this game that's coming up, it's very exciting in terms of a matchup. It's kind of that dream matchup, that a lot of people have longed to see. Chris, this was a matchup that people thought, was going to happen in the regular season, but some scheduling snafus, it had to get canceled and things like that. But I mean, you just look here, on New Year's Eve, as you said, 8:00 on ESPN, these programs have only faced one time, and that was in 1993 in the Citrus Bowl. Georgia won 21-14 in that matchup, but it is in Georgia's second home here, as you see, Chris, in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and Georgia, at least at the time of recording this, has opened up it as a 6.5-point favorite with the over-under at 61.5.
Yeah, we're doing this on December 7th, so you may want to check back later in case there's injuries or changes. Just a quick reminder, our channel is presented by Stakes. You can predict sports better than the crowd. For a chance to win NFTs with Stakes, players can influence or rather cement their sports predictions against friends, other fans, and influencers forever. Don't let your sports genius go overlooked. Join Stakes and have the best predictions captured in the moment. Head to playwithstakes.com/14. Use our invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. That is a predictions app, not a betting app. If you want to bet, we'll have a little information on that later. We've got a new partnership with a company called BROTHROW. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But Blayne, let's talk about the matchups on both sides of the ball. Before we get into that, though, one thing that we are watching closely going into these games is guys declaring for the draft, transfer portal, all those sorts of things, injuries. Not a lot of news to report as we do this just a few days after this matchup has been announced.
No, nothing more really than Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's been kind of a lightning rod there. Chris, some people speculating, is he really, so badly hurt that he can't play in this matchup? Is it more that he's protecting his draft stock, or is it that, the young man has tried all year to get back from a hamstring injury? And the reality of it is that there's millions of dollars out there on the table for him in the NFL, and he's making the decision that he and his doctors and everybody feels is the wisest one to make. You can't fault him either way. I know that Ohio State fans would love to have JSN on the field there in Atlanta New Year's Eve, but other than that, I think both teams are going to be getting pretty healthy for this one, Chris. And there's also, as we highlight here in the headlines of this matchup, SEC versus Big Ten. That's always a heated rivalry. You got two Heisman finalists in this one when it comes to Stetson Bennett the fourth, and then CJ Stroud. And then we're going to be talking about here in the numbers. It's really a strengths versus weaknesses type game in this one. Yeah. So a lot to really dive into here.
Well, Stetson Bennett is, of course, Georgia's quarterback. He is going to be making the trip to the Heisman finalist ceremony. Probably not going to win, but he's had a remarkable career. Georgia's offense has been, I think, better than people realize. Georgia kind of a program built on defense. You think of the running game, but Georgia has been incredibly efficient through the air and passing the ball. I'll have you pull up some stats for us here on Georgia's
offense first.
Yes.
All right, Georgia's offense.
But anyway. Yeah. Always good when your co-host throws you a curveball. Talk about it. I mean, Georgia passes the ball a little bit more than it runs it. Yeah, but it runs it awfully well too. And Georgia's Achilles heel is it tends to fumble the ball a bit, but Stetson Bennett's only thrown 6 picks. Georgia's passing offense has been a handful for pretty much everybody it's played.
Yeah, it's when Georgia has struggled this year, it's been uncharacteristic fumbles and 3 or 4 of them on exchanges between the quarterback and running back, like at the mesh point. Really weird stuff has happened on that. But Stetson Bennett has been better than most anybody probably could have even dreamt of, especially when he first started to become the quarterback for Georgia, 2.5 years ago now. But it has been an unbelievably efficient year for him, as you said, and also he's done so a lot without his number one receiver, AD Mitchell, for the entire year, Chris. And Georgia's going to be, you talk about people getting healthy, Georgia's going to be getting AD Mitchell back. But yeah, they've been a team that has not been afraid to spread the ball around to different targets. Dylan Bell, a freshman, has come on. Of course, Ladd McConkey's made a name for himself, and they have 2 tight ends in Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers that are the envy of the entire country when it comes to tight end play. And they also do that in the blocking game, not only as pass catchers as well. So Stetson Bennett has been great. And it doesn't show a lot of times in the yardage at times, Chris, but he's pretty dynamic with his legs as well.
One of the things that Ohio State does well is sack the quarterback. It's got 32 of them, but Georgia's got probably the best offensive line in the country and only gives up 7. That's got to be a concern if you're Ohio State, because I think Ohio State's defense has taken a beating, maybe a little bit unfairly from time to time. It's probably better than people give it credit for being, but one of the things the Buckeyes do well appears to be something Georgia can sort of take away.
Yeah, and also, too, I think what was surprising to everyone, Chris, late in the year was the big plays that Michigan was able to tally up on Ohio State in the passing game. J.J. McCarthy had a big day passing the ball in that one, and I think that is something that not everybody was expecting. Michigan had 530 yards in that game versus Ohio State, and that was in Columbus. 278 passing yards, 252 rushing. So really, they just got eviscerated. That defense that had been to that point much improved from 2021 to 2022. But you face a team in a Michigan team who is a physical presence on the offensive line. And Chris, guess who, as the day we're recording this, which 2 offensive lines were named the finalists for the Joe Moore Award for Best Offensive Line? It's Georgia and Michigan. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the most encouraging news for for Ohio State's defensive front and secondary at this point, the way they looked against some of the Michigan receivers. But hey, there has been times this year where definitely Ohio State's defense has stepped up, particularly in that Penn State game where they were able to kind of take over late.
Ohio State had a couple of guys named to the first team All Big Ten defense, namely linebacker Tommy Eichenberg. Where do you see the Buckeyes presenting challenges to Georgia's offense?
I mean, in terms of like game records, it's guys like, and I'm going to butcher his last name, so please forgive me. But
that's why I didn't say it.
JT Tuamelu, he basically took over a couple games this year for Ohio State. That Penn State game in particular, it's just like on the other side with Georgia and Jalen Carter, Chris. When you have a player that's that good, at any point in time, they can go and wreck a game, right? And Warren McClendon did go down with an MCL injury in the SEC championship, the starting right tackle for Georgia. They think it's a minor sprain and that with this whole month off that he'll be able to get back. But if it is the younger, some people may say more talented Amarius Mims at right tackle, I could see them maybe moving JT around, trying to get him on some favorable matchups there. And I think that could be something really good. And like you said, in terms of active guys in the middle, Eichenberg, Steele Chambers, they've been opportunistic at times throughout the year. Saw Steele Chambers late against Maryland this year, kind of iced that game with a play where he picked it and ran into the end zone. So, I would say it would be great individual performances that Ohio State would need on that defensive side to give Georgia some trouble offensively.
Georgia's got one thing that's going to give anybody problems, and that's the best 2 tight ends in the SEC, Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington. How do you think Ohio State covers those guys?
Man, it's going to be tough because I don't know that I don't know that anybody can cover those tight ends in terms of on an entire game basis. But man, when you're talking about adding a healthy AD Mitchell back into the mix and Ladd McConkey having a whole month to get back healthy for Georgia, I feel like they're going to have their full complement of weapons, just like the Ohio State offense is going to get back and get healthy. So I think realistically in this game, you're going to see Ohio State and Georgia's offenses at the most healthy and the most prime ability that they've been at with this month off to rest, Chris.
Anything else on this side of the matchup that catches your eye before we switch sides of the ball?
I just think that in terms of Georgia's offensive line play, like we said before, they've been so physical, not only, protecting Stetson Bennett, but they've been very, very physical in the run game. And I feel like Kendall Milton is really starting to hit his stride for Georgia. He's a guy who was injured a lot early on in the year, but he's had a big game in the SEC championship, a big game against Georgia Tech late in the year. And then, of course, Kenny McIntosh as well. So I think those two backs really have an opportunity to have a big game, as we saw that Donovan Edwards did against Ohio State in their matchup there in Columbus.
Okay, before we talk about C.J. Stroud and Ohio State's incredible offense against the best defense in the country, we want to announce a new partnership. They are BROTHROW. It is not a sports book. You can bet directly against our community of users at Southeastern 14, which we're literally just starting. You can save, or at least the average bettor saves, over $150 a month with BROTHROW over a typical sports book. It's because there's no juice. You can know who is on the other side of every bet. It's just guy betting against guy. And again, we will launch our community soon. Man, this is going to be such a great partnership.
I've heard ads on the radio and things for them lately, and I heard a guy, one of the founders, talking about BROTHROW and the concept. This was even before we ended up being a partner. I was like, that is a cool concept there, Chris. So super excited that Southeastern 14. It's kind of like social media meets the sports betting world. It's pretty interesting.
Well, and it sucks if you're betting $11 to win 10. Now you bet 10 to win 10. And that's the whole concept of this, is to let you win more. And that's what this app does. It is legal in all 50 states because it's not the house. Everybody has a fair chance at winning. It doesn't take a cut of any bets. I mean, what's not to like here? You don't even have to deposit money to begin. No minimum bets. Bettors pay each other directly. So if Blayne says, I'll take Georgia in this game against the points, and I take Ohio State, we just make the bet. We settle up ourselves like gentlemen. Here's what you need to do. Go to our link. It's BROTHROW, BROTHROW.com/SE14. You sign up. You join our community of users. I will accept you into that if you do this code. You can find me on there. Have some bets with us. Have some fun and help us celebrate our new partner here at Southeastern 14. Okay, Blayne, when Ohio State's got the ball, that has been quite an outfit. C.J. Stroud, one of the better players in America. Ohio State with one of the better receiving rooms in America. But my goodness, Georgia is a powerhouse in its own right on the defensive side of the ball. The Bulldogs lost a ton of guys in the NFL. Almost didn't matter. Georgia still had the best defense in the country. It just reloaded with Jalen Carter and some new names. Secondary highlighted by Christopher Smith. Just ball players all over the place. Cornerback Keely Ringo is going to be a first rounder, even if his year wasn't quite as good as maybe people hoped. My goodness,
the SEC championship was really rough.
Even if that happened, he's still a talented player, and
doubt.
This is still an incredibly talented defense.
Yeah, the really weird about Keely Ringo, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But in terms of this defense, it was obviously lots of people. Not only did they lose all those players, Chris, they also lost Dan Lanning, who was the defensive coordinator and went to Oregon. But when you have Kirby Smart there, and he was able to promote from within Glenn Schumann, and then of course have Will Muschamp, who's everybody knows that name, that's been around forever with Texas and Auburn and South Carolina and Florida. and he played at Georgia. Now he comes back to his alma mater, and he's the co-defensive coordinator there with Glenn Schumann. When you have all those defensive minds in the room, I mean, it's almost unfair to the opposing offense that they can come up with so many ways to attack you. And then, oh, by the way, they still have good players who were there as well, Chris. It was just they were kind of waiting their turn behind those 8 defensive players that went to the NFL ahead of them, 5 of which were first-round picks. So it is important to underscore the places where they do have some experience is on the back end. It seems like Kamari Lassiter, Keely Ringo, Javon Bullard, and Chris Smith all played integral roles last year for Georgia in their playoff run, more so than people would think, especially Keely Ringo. Keely Ringo will have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, it would seem like, because there's been times this year where he's just not played up to his personal standard and has been, Kirby's going to leave him on an island. And sometimes when that happens, you're going to get beat. The one real inexperienced factor here is freshman Malachi Starks, extremely talented, but he kind of undercut a route and cover 2, didn't get kind of over the top against LSU. They burn him for a touchdown. That's also happened another time this year against Florida. So you got to think that Ohio State's going to see that and think that they have the opportunity with Ibuka and Harrison Jr. to take advantage of those things. So I think the receiving core of Ohio State versus the secondary, in particular, maybe Keely Ringo at corner and Malachi Starks at safety, is going to be something to watch going into this one. But also, too, Travion Henderson should be coming back. Mayan Williams should be coming back for Ohio State. So people think it's all just throwing pass happy stuff. They run the ball pretty effectively as well, Chris. Ohio State does.
Okay, throw up the numbers on the matchup here, Blayne. And here's the thing. You talked about inexperience. We'll use that term relatively. The thing last year is, even when Georgia played all those kids that went to the NFL, those backups played throughout the season. Georgia just kept its defense fresh. I mean, it played its second team almost as much as it did its first team. And so a lot of these kids have been on this stage before a year ago, even if they weren't starting.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially on the defensive front, they have more experience, and like I said, the secondary had more experience. What group didn't have the experience was the inside linebackers, because Georgia had Quay Walker, Channing Tindall, and Nakobe Dean, and they had kind of 3 for 2 there. They just didn't rotate in Smile Munden and Jamon Dumas Johnson that you see this year playing, a Tresman Marshall, Ryan Davis, those guys that are doing the inside linebacker duty for Georgia this year. So. But Jamon Dumas Johnson has ended up, he was a guy that had all SEC honors and ends up being a real leader for this team and kind of stepped into that emotional leader role that Nakobe Dean left out. So it'll be incumbent upon those guys to kind of play beyond their years. They're no longer inexperienced after having a whole year, but it's going to be incumbent upon them to step up and make sure that Travion Henderson doesn't hurt you. And then also Mayan Williams doesn't hurt you. Even Dallin Hayden contributed for Ohio State in that run game. And then, oh, by the way, he doesn't do it a lot, but C.J. Stroud is more than capable of hurting people with his legs, Chris.
Well, one of the criticisms of Stroud is his accuracy would wane at times. And to be honest, I didn't watch a ton of Ohio State this year, but one of the criticisms of Georgia that I do have from watching the Bulldogs is that they could get beaten at times. Keely Ringo could give up some penalties or just some catches. I think he gave up a lot of yards to receivers this year, period.
Oh, yeah.
How dangerous is Ohio State's passing attack for Georgia's pass defense?
I think Marvin Harrison Jr., of course, everybody knows Marvin Harrison. That was a legend in the NFL with Peyton Manning and those Colts teams for all those years. But Marvin Harrison Jr., I think, is maybe the single most talented receiver in the country. He can do everything. He's a bigger bodied receiver than his dad was. And he's just so good at you talk about running routes underneath, being able to take the top off the defense. Marvin Harrison Jr. can do it all. And then you have Emeka Ibuka over there as well that they're able to throw. Julian Fleming, who's a talented receiver as well. So there's no shortage. And then Cade Stover, traditionally Ohio State, in a long time, they haven't really had big go-to tight end type thing. This isn't, going back to early 2000s. Okay, this is more of a throwback with Cade Stover, a guy who was converted from the defensive side of the ball, now plays tight end, and man, he's a big factor in their run game. They'll pull him and use him in some of their gap scheme type stuff. They'll also use him in split zone looks, splitting sneak him out in terms of some play action things off of that. And he's tough to bring down once he has the ball, Chris. So a all around balanced and tough to stop passing attack for Ohio State.
Anything else on this side of the matchup? But one thing I will note is Georgia didn't really send a lot of pressure at times, but you remember the Tennessee game, where Georgia just went all out, blitzed Tennessee between the tackles a bunch. The Vols just had a big issue stopping it, threw Hendon Hooker off his rhythm. I'm just wondering if there's things like that Georgia will do in this matchup that maybe they didn't show the rest of the year because for whatever reason they didn't have to.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to see, okay, how does Ohio State go about pass protecting against, the interior rush of Jalen Carter to start off with? Are they trying to use a double team and things like that? Because that's kind of where it all opens up, right? Yeah. If you can win with 4 on their 5, then, Georgia may feel comfortable of trying to help with some more underneath coverage instead of bringing an extra rusher, being able to bracket on one side. Now, the biggest thing about Jackson Smith and Jigba not being there, if you had Marvin Harrison on one side and Jackson Smith and Jigba being on the other side, that takes away a bracket where you can't play man and also have a guy over top of both of them. Now Georgia can do that to Marvin Harrison Jr., kind of try to take him away, isolate him, much so like they did Jalen Hyatt against Tennessee. And then now it frees you up to, if you need to bring an extra rusher, sometimes they use Javon Bullard to do that from the secondary late, and disguise things. That can happen as well. But as you pointed out, Chris, when Georgia does come after the quarterback, that Tennessee game, I think they had 5 or 6 sacks in that game. LSU, 4 sacks and a strip sack in that game. So, and one of those came from Robert Bill, who was their leading sack getter last year and ended up, not having as many this year. But he's going to have a whole month to kind of rest his body as well. Him and Chaz Chambliss both kind of came on late in terms of rushing the passer for Georgia. So I think that's going to be interesting to see. Can Georgia win with 4 early, and what are they able to do with that secondary because of it?
Okay, a few miscellaneous things we always like to bring up. Penalties. Georgia penalized 46 yards a game, Ohio State 50, so not a lot of difference there. FEI ranks these special teams 1 to 131 in the FBS, and Ohio State ranks 18th, and Georgia ranks 48th. So OSU's special teams a little bit better than Georgia's according to that. And strength of schedule, this is according to ESPN's FPI. Ohio State got knocked by some people for playing a quote-unquote easy schedule, but Georgia probably played the easiest slate in the SEC too. So according to FPI, not a lot of difference in terms of strength of schedule between those teams. Okay, the over-under on this 61.5 as we do this on December the 7th. The line, Georgia 6.5. That makes for a predicted final of 34-28. Blayne, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I think the line is fair. I think you may see it creep up a little bit more, maybe in Georgia's favor as it gets closer to the day. Honestly, just because Georgia's been so good in Atlanta, Chris. That's kind of their second home now, and I think the ticket sales are going to be pretty indicative of the Georgia faithful grabbing those up. I think they just released some more standing room only tickets even before we recorded this, and those are gone already, Chris. So it is a jam-packed, hanging from the rafters, as Dusty Rhodes used to say. Blake would appreciate that reference because it's wrestling. But in terms of this matchup, it's as we said, they've only met one time. Can you believe these two programs, these two iconic programs have only met one time in 1993? So it's going to be that contrast of styles. They think styles, they say styles make fights. Well, here you have the tremendous defense of Georgia versus the high flying, powerful offense of Ohio State. And, at least on the surface, that's what it looks like. But we've highlighted both that both defenses and both offenses can get things done here. So I just think the main thing here is you're going to have two healthy teams. And I think the line is about right because of where this game is at and because what Georgia has done to this point in the year. And it's, but everybody should know that I think this is the most dangerous matchup out there in the playoff for Georgia. I think if Georgia gets through this, they've got a very high likelihood of repeating as national champions, no matter who wins on the other side. But this is the matchup I think that Georgia didn't want to see if you were coming into the playoff.
Here's what I find kind of interesting. The over-under based on what the teams did this year, what they scored and gave up, should be 58. It's 61.5. Now, I'm looking through Ohio State's results, and I think this kind of explains it. Michigan scored 45 on Ohio State. Maryland scored 30. Penn State scored 31. Some of the better offenses that Ohio State played scored some points, and, of course, Georgia, as good as that defense is, LSU did put some points and yards up on Georgia, although some of that was the score got out of hand quickly, and maybe that dictated the game somewhat, which, you can probably say that somewhat about the games that Ohio State played at times too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're so uber talented as both these teams are, Chris, you got to remember you're dealing with, except in Stetson Bennett's case, we know he's, 34 years old and getting close to drawing his, having his 401k and all that in order. We know he's an older guy, but you're dealing with 18 to 21-year-olds for the most part. And hey, focus can wane a little bit, right? When you're that age with these guys. So I think when you know that you're supremely talented, sometimes the focus can wane a little bit. There's been lapses for Ohio State's defense. There's been lapses at times for Georgia's offense in terms of the year, their normal output. But at the end of the day, I think the committee got it right. You got two of the best four teams in the country here, and I think it's going to be interesting when they meet up. Chris, what do you think in terms of prediction for this game?
I think the line seems about right to me. The fact that Georgia's got I don't know if quasi-home game is the right way to say it, but whatever you want to make of it. Look, Athens and Atlanta are not far apart. Georgia's going to have a massive advantage in that building, I would think, or at least a significant one. So there's that. I also like Georgia to get stops more than I do Ohio State, which is a big thing for me in games like this. I feel like Georgia will cover. I wouldn't bet the house on it. I don't anyway. But the over-under is the one that I don't have a good feel on.
You can find somebody in BROTHROW that you can bet whatever number you want to on it. We're not recommending that, but you can if you find someone who will match it dollar for dollar, you go ahead in there and BROTHROW and put it in there. I think that Georgia is going to be extremely hard to stop in this game. We talk about Ohio State. We talk about Ohio State having the prolific offense. I think we've seen at times when Georgia has to turn it on, Chris. You talk about hanging 50 on LSU. You talk about having, being up big, having 24 points on Tennessee at halftime and then kind of throttling it down in the second half because of the weather. And then, of course, that just assault that they put on Oregon earlier in the year. I think you're going to see peak Georgia offense in this one. And I think you're going to see the Georgia run game have a big day and those tight ends get going because of that in the play action. Also, A.D. Mitchell being back. I just think it all bodes is too much, and I agree with you. I just think Georgia's defense gets more stops at the end of the day than Ohio State's does. I'm going to take Georgia to win and Georgia to cover in this one. I can see it being a 35-27 game, something along those lines in this one.
Yeah, in which case that's right at the over-under almost. So anyway, that's our opinion on the matter. We will have opinions on every single bowl game involving SEC teams. We're a little late in getting those started. Again, we're doing this one. It's our first one on the 7th. The reason we wanted to see who's in the portal, who's opting out, all those things before we started offering educated opinion on games. So best way to catch all those is hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave us a like too. That always helps. Thank you for watching Southeastern 14 presented by Stakes. We'll be back with plenty more of these bowl previews very soon.